what's going on? Lego Man 123 are back with another video, and welcome back to another top 10 video, where today in this episode I'll be counting down my top 10 most shocking The Legend of Korra moments. So without further ado, let's get into it. At number 10 we have Poli's death, and this happened in, I believe, the third last or second last episode of season 3 of The Legend of Korra, and this happened when Lin and Sue are actually battling Poli on like some sort of mountain cliff top, and like they're battling, and then like Poli does shoot Lin, and like just before it gets to her, Lin quickly like sort of has a sort of defense with like some rocks by earth bending, but like the power of the combustion bending sort of destroys those rocks, and then Lin not goes flying, but she goes a couple of meters away, and like just before Poli's about to combustion bend again, Sue actually quickly does come from behind some rocks and like shoot her armor on to Poli by using metal bending. I'm not 100% sure if it's like actual metal or like sort of titanium. I'm not 100% sure. And like as Poli like shoots, like basically the metal or whatever it is goes onto her, and like the power of it basically pretty much just blows up her head, which is pretty shocking to actually see that. But I'm glad we don't see that, because that would be pretty scary to actually see that. All we see is Zahir like looking into the distance, and like there's this like sort of massive sort of not pile, but like sort of smoke coming into the air. That was definitely pretty shocking to actually see that actually happen. At number 9, we have Varric is a bad guy, and this happened in Season 2 during the episodes of like the Civil War, and this was when the Northern and Southern Water Tribe were in like sort of a civil war between one another because of like past events, and Varric was like a big sort of player on the Southern Water Tribe during the Civil War, because him, Asami, and then Bolin, they actually became like partners in a way for Asami's company, and then I believe Varric like bought and like helped Asami for the company, but then like he sort of portrays Asami by actually stealing the mechs from her sort of like part in like a storage facility, steals the mechs to actually use it in the Civil War, and then he actually does frame, I believe, what's his name, Marco, to actually. He actually frames Marco so then like he could be covered and no one would actually expect him. Now, I didn't really expect Varric to actually be a bad guy, because I thought he was definitely a really interesting character, and I thought he was like very helpful, like helping out Asami, but then to actually see him become a bad guy was definitely pretty shocking, but also very interesting, because he sort of does redeem himself in, I believe, Season 3, but then he actually does go back to a bad guy in Season 4, but then once again redeems himself. But this one is a lot more sort of interesting, because like he sort of hides his sort of story about stealing like stuff from Asami, because like he's helping Asami with her company, so Asami really didn't expect that to actually happen. But then like the whole reveal of like Varric stealing was just because like for the Civil War they needed sort of weaponry and all that to actually defeat the Northern Water Tribe, so that was definitely really interesting. At number 8, we have Zahir assassinates the Earth Queen, and this happened in an episode in Season 3 while Zahir and the other Red Lotus members were actually in Ba Sing Se, because I believe they followed like Korra and Team Avatar there, and then like Zahir sort of made a plan with the Earth Queen that if the Earth Queen gives Korra, then like something will happen and all that type of stuff. Not 100% sure on the exact details, but then like he sort of overhears that Korra has like been taken away by I believe sandbenders, or yeah, I believe it might be sandbenders, and then like he sort of confronts the Earth Queen and basically says, I overheard you talking about Korra and all that, and like the Earth Queen is starting to get like really scared in a way, because like Zahir is definitely a pretty sort of scary character to actually be like faced with, and then especially with the other Red Lotus members, and then like Zahir like goes up to the Earth Queen and basically says, I don't believe in kings or queens, or I think it's just queens, and like he begins to actually take like sort of airbend her air away, which was definitely pretty shocking to actually see that, because I always thought like airbending was like for freedom and all that, something what isn't actually used for like violence, and to see Zahir actually use this to actually take away someone's like most precious thing in life, their air, was definitely pretty shocking. And I thought it was really interesting how like he like air bends it out and the, like a massive sort of sphere goes over the person's head. So that was definitely really interesting to see that. And he basically says like stuff about like, you think freedom is something that you give and all that, and then he like ends it with saying air is something like with freedom and all that. It's really interesting how he actually does say that, and I think he's definitely like pretty reasonable with it as well. And then after the Earth Queen does die, he basically has this whole announcement about it, and like the whole of Ba Sing Se basically goes in chaos in a way. And number 7, we have Amon takes bending away, and this happened during the events to actually a couple of people in Season 1, because we learn that Amon doesn't have any elemental power, and his family are actually killed by firebenders, and he has this whole lie to actually make people trust him a lot more, and he tells people that he has a special skill, which I believe he said he got from like some sort of spirit, that he's gotten the skill to actually take away people's bending. So it was really shocking to actually see that he could actually do that. But then we learn in, I believe, the second last episode, that basically whatever he told the people in Republic City, it was just like a massive lie. Like, he does have an elemental power, which is water, and then his parents weren't actually killed by firebenders. And he actually does show the crowd that he has a scar from a firebender, but that's also a lie. He made that up as well. So definitely really interesting just to see how much of an impact Amon actually did have on his lie. And then how he actually does take away people's bending is that he actually does use a pretty advanced skill of blood bending to actually block, I believe, like the chakras in people's bodies, so then like they can't use their elemental power. So definitely really interesting to actually see, and also pretty shocking to actually see this really advanced skill of blood bending to actually take away people's elemental power. But I believe it's not like permanent, because with like blood bending it may not be permanent. Like, you can, after maybe like a couple of weeks or days, like your elemental powers will slowly come back. But I might be completely wrong about that. It might be actually permanent. And number 6, we have Zahir flies, and this happened in the same episode as Poli's death. During Season 3, we actually learned that Zahir is a really big follower of a pretty spiritual and a pretty well-skilled airbender who goes by the name of Guru Paktik. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly, but if I'm not, very sorry about that. And we actually learned that airbender actually learned how to fly by using airbending, and Zahir actually does attempt this in this episode, and it was really shocking to actually see that it did work, because the only way to actually fly is if you let go of your earthly tenets. I believe it's something along the lines of that. It was definitely really shocking to actually see that Amon, why do I keep saying Amon? Zahir unlocked this skill of airbending, because not even Aang could do it, and he was pretty spiritual. Even like Tenzin couldn't do it. So it was really interesting, but also pretty shocking to actually see someone who hasn't had airbending for like ever, and he only got it on harmonic conversions, but he was the second airbender in the history to actually unlock the ability to fly. At number 5, we have Bolin joins Kavira, and this happened during the event between Season 3 and 4, because the time difference is roughly about 3 years. So then Bolin actually does join Kavira, who's trying to have all the Earth Kingdoms in like one whole sort of part where she and Bataille Jr. can actually rule. It was definitely really interesting and very kind of Bolin to actually join Kavira, because he really does like to help people and like be there for people. So it's definitely really kind of Bolin to actually do that. But then we actually learn the truth about like Kavira's plan, that how she wants to rule like the Earth sort of empire and all that, like basically start over, and like she wants to be very ambitious towards this goal by basically doing whatever she must to have what she wants. So it was really sad to actually see Bolin torn between the sort of bad side of Kavira and Petard Jr. and then also like the good side, because he basically has like no idea what actually Kavira's plan is, because he's basically like a sort of henchman in a way. Basically, he basically does whatever Kavira tells him to do, and Bolin has no idea what Kavira's true plan is. So it was really sad to actually see this, but it was definitely really shocking to actually see Bolin be a part of Kavira's sort of empire for so long, because after we learn the truth, Bolin is actually still part of Kavira's sort of rebellion in a way, or like sort of team, and like even after Opal and all that try to persuade him to actually come back, his sort of ambitious goal to actually help people and be there for people is sort of blocking his true sort of path in a way, if that does make sense. So it's definitely really shocking to actually see Bolin actually join Kavira. And number 4, we have Toph comes back, and out of Katara and Zuko, I really felt like she was the least unexpected to actually reappear, because we do know that she did have 2 children, Lin and Su Beifong, and they became really good earthbenders and then also metalbenders, and I really didn't expect to actually see Toph again, because we learned that she pretty much like disconnected from the world, and every once in a while she will like come out of the shadows and like be a part of the world again, but only for like a brief time. And it was definitely really shocking to actually see her once again with her whole sort of attitude and all that, her sort of jokes and all that. It was really shocking and pretty funny to actually see her once again, and I'm really glad they actually did do it in this sort of season, because in Korra alone, in I believe like the 5th episode of season 4, and like in the final moments, we actually do see Toph as an old lady, and it was definitely really shocking, but also great to see her once again. And number 3, we have Korra gets poisoned, and this happened in an episode in season 3, because Zahir actually does capture Korra, and to get her into the Avatar state, he actually has to poison her with something pretty shocking, which is mercury. It was definitely really shocking to actually see that Zahir would go to such a length to make her go into the Avatar state, but then to kill her. So it was definitely really shocking to actually see that. And then, like, the sort of part where the sort of henchman actually does sort of move it into her body and, like, move it up to her was definitely really shocking, because, like, it was intense, because Korra really couldn't do much, because, like, if she tried to escape, she'd probably, like, most likely get killed or, like, re-tied up. And, like, it was shocking because, like, the music and, like, Korra's expression, I think she was, like, saying no, or, like, she was, like, really scared, because I definitely would be if I was about to get poisoned by mercury. And then once it actually does enter her body, you actually do feel for Korra, because mercury is something pretty dangerous to actually have in the body, and, like, Korra's reaction is definitely something pretty reasonable, because, like, she's in pain, like, definitely a lot in a lot of pain. So it's definitely really shocking to actually see that happen. And number 2, we have Korra creates a new spirit portal, and this happened in the final episode of season 4 and the final episode of The Legend of Korra, because after Kavira and Korra actually battle, they actually get sort of shot or like exploded in a way to actually where the spirit vines are and all that, and like both of them are actually struggling to actually sort of stand up and all that, because it was definitely a pretty big explosion. And then Kuvira actually does find her sort of spirit gun sort of tied up and like wrapped in a way in the vines in the sort of spirit sort of type forest thing, and like she actually does go up to it and like go to the trigger and like sort of leans back on it to actually trigger it, and like it begins like shooting around, and like the sort of sound of it happens, and like a lot of color with like that sort of pinkish color. And then when Kavira is sort of like on the ground in a way, Korra actually does go there, and like she uses pretty much all her power to actually stop that pretty scary beam of like pink light actually hurt Kavira and Korra. And I thought it was definitely really shocking to actually see Korra help Kavira after basically everything she had done. But I guess that's the sort of role the Avatar has to take. No matter like who you are, you always have to protect those in need. So it's definitely really shocking to see that. But then the most shocking thing was Korra created a new spirit portal from these sort of spirit vines. I really did not expect that to actually happen, and I thought it was really shocking to actually see that Korra did create this new spirit portal. But I really did enjoy the music while this actually did happen. And then like as the sort of pink sort of beam goes across Republic City, and then it like slowly sort of rewinds and then goes back to the sort of spirit sort of forest. It actually has this sort of beam of light, and then it like shoots up and then does create the new spirit portal in Republic City. And finally, at number one, we have Korra and Asami. Now, this was definitely really shocking to actually see this, and I definitely don't have nothing against them actually being in a relationship with one another. I think it's definitely really interesting, and I really do ship these two together because I think they're definitely great with one another. And just to actually see them have this sort of moment in the final scene of The Legend of Korra and Season 4 was definitely really shocking to see that, but then also really exciting to actually see that as well. And I think this is definitely a really interesting sort of relationship as they do have, and I once again don't have nothing against this because in Season 1, this sort of relationship as friends starts off a little rocky, but then in Season 2 they become really good friends. The relationship is still a little rocky, but not as much as Season 1, but then in Season 3 they have a really nice relationship as like really close friends. And then during the events of Season 4 we actually learn that out of her friends Marco, Bolin, Asami was the only one who actually Korra wrote to, and I thought it was definitely really interesting and also pretty shocking to actually see that Korra actually made this decision. But it just shows how much of a good friend like Asami and Korra are to one another, and I really did like the whole sort of relationship they did have during the events of that. And then in the final episode of The Legend of Korra and this moment, we actually learned that their relationship has definitely come a long way, and they've actually became really good friends, and they're sort of starting that relationship as like girlfriend and girlfriend, which I think is definitely really pretty exciting, but then also very shocking.